Welcome to Siyum Masechet Bava Metzia. Great to see you all here. Nice to always see familiar faces from Siyum to Siyum. Nice to see new faces as well. Our Siyum Masechet Bava Metzia is sponsored by the Gewurz family in loving memory of their dear father and grandfather Samuel Gewurz, Shmuel ben Yehuda Leib v'Rachel Mirel Zichrono Livracha. He spent the last 3 years of his life learning Bava Metzia with Chavrita almost every day. Together they made it to the middle of the 8th parak. We finished the 8th parak at the Shiva. Now we complete the study as a community of learners in his memory. Yehi Zichro Baruch. And during this difficult time, it's hard to imagine after, when the first Siyum happened during the war, we all thought that, okay, one Siyum, but now we're kind of marking periods and Siyums, and we're still kind of struggling in this complicated time. So we will also dedicate our Siyum to the safety of our soldiers, to Jews in Israel in the north and the south, around the country, also around the world, to the safe return of all the hostages in memory of all the people who have fallen, and a refuah shleima for all those who are injured. Okay, the order of events for today. We're going to start with, as our usual, finishing the Masechet. We actually got lucky with a very short daf this time, which will allow us time for other things. We're going to hear a shir from Dr. Elana Stein, Hain, then insights from Elaine Gottesman, and we will end the Siyum with Tfilot for the soldiers, the injured, and the hostages. Okay, we'll get started with our Mishnah. I'm going to go back to the Mishnah at the bottom of Kuf Yu Chet Amud Bet, and I'm going to reread it for those who learned it. We learned the daf together. I'm going to reread it a little bit differently than I read it before, which kind of I mentioned also last night. The Siyum, it's a good indication that it's a good way of learning that when you learn things and then you read them a second time and a third or a fourth, all of a sudden you see them sometimes with a different perspective. Or if you read something, which is what happened with me, I read some commentary and then that kind of got my mind thinking of it in a bit of a different way. So let's start with the Mishnah. Again, we have Shtei Ginot Zoha Gavzo V'Hayarak Beintayin. We have somebody living up in the upper field. We have someone living in the lower field, and there's like a ledge in between, and where really it's made from the ground of the person above, and then something's growing out from the side there, and then the airspace is basically of the person underneath. The question is, who does this vegetable belong to, or whatever grew here? Rabbi Meir Shel Elyon belongs to the upper person, obviously because the roots are coming out of the ground that belong to the upper field, and therefore it belongs to that person. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shel Tachton. Rabbi Yehuda says it belongs to the person living below. Normally, we would have a Mishnah, and the Mishnah would end right here, and that would be it. Sometimes, once in a while, usually it doesn't appear in the Mishnah, perhaps in the Tosefta, perhaps in the Midrash Halacha, where we have a conversation between the two people who are arguing. So this Mishnah actually brings in the whole conversation, which I think is interesting in and of itself. Amar Rabbi Meir, im yirtzeh hayom nikach et afro, ein kan yarak. Rabbi Meir says, of course I'm right, because if the upper person wants to take away the soil, well then nothing's going to grow. So obviously it belongs to the person up above. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, im yirtzeh tachton lemalot et ginato, ein kan yarak. Rabbi Yehuda says if the bottom person wants to fill up the ground and fill up the airspace, then nothing's going to grow there because it's going to prevent the vegetable from growing. So they have this back and forth. Nobody really seems to win. And Rabbi Meir now says, Me'achal sheshnehem yicholim limchot ze al ze, ro'in mechan yerek ze chai. Rabbi Meir says, okay, I accept what you said. You're right. Really, the upper person could stop. The lower person can prevent it. Each one can really prevent this from happening. Therefore, I have no choice but to say, Ro'in mehechan yerek ze chai. What we do is we look at what's giving it its life. Now, that's not really a very clear-cut answer, because you could say it's the air, and it's photosynthesis, it's getting sunlight, which is really from the airspace of the lower person. It could be it's from the roots, and that's where the nourishment is coming from. Most likely that's what Rabbi Meir is saying, and he just kind of shifts gears and says, well, I can't prove it from the first way, I'll prove it from the second way. And what's interesting about this is Rabbi Yehuda doesn't respond. We usually, when you have it back and forth, there's usually a retort. Rabbi Yehuda at this point is silent. And when I looked at Mishnat Eretz Israel, which is a fabulous book that I've quoted a number of times, written by Safrai, and you can find it in Sefaria only in Hebrew at this point. Maybe somebody at some point will translate it. But it's a great academic work on the Mishnah. And he pointed out there's something that made me think. He said that Rabbi Meir, basically, what's going on here? Rabbi Meir heard what Rabbi Yehuda said and kind of said, you're right. I was wrong about what I was thinking because that's not really a good claim. By the way, it might remind you, you might remember this argument, and we've had these kind of arguments before, which bracha comes first in Kiddush, right? Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel each argue, well, without the wine, there wouldn't be Kiddush, and without the Kiddush, there wouldn't be wine, right? So it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And that's really what's going on here, that kind of argument. And which is basically circular, you're not going to get anywhere. So what he says is after Rabbi Meir listens and hears the other side, he shifts position. And he realizes, and he calls them, I'm going to say the words in Hebrew because it's just a very brilliant way he wrote it. He's a chacham patuach makshiv u'mishtachneh. He shows that he's a wise man who's open, who listens, and then is convinced. Okay? And he basically listens to the other person and realizes that I have to shift gears here. And that's why Rabbi Meir then comes and says, okay, I'm going to go with a different way of thinking. But I wanted to even point out more so, if you look at carefully at what's going on here, what kind of argument are Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda making in the beginning? They're making this argument as to who can destroy what's growing. And Rabbi Meir says, well, the upper person can destroy it, so obviously that means it belongs to him. And Rabbi Yehuda says the lower one can destroy it, so obviously it belongs to him. And then they realize, and perhaps Rabbi Meir, as they say in Hebrew, nafal asimon, the asimon clicks, it all clicks for him. And he realizes it's not about destroying. It's not about who has the power to destroy. And he says the words, listen carefully, ro'in mehechan yerek zechai. We look, where does the life come from? And it's not about who can destroy who. And I couldn't, think of a more important message during these complicated days, but it's not about who can destroy who and what. That's not what it's all about. It's about where's the life coming from. And that's why I think it's such a powerful statement he makes that Rabbi Yehuda has nothing to say at that point, right? That it's all about life and it's not about who can fight over who. And, we've done an entire Masechet about people arguing, right? This is mine, right? This also sounds a lot like the beginning of the Masechet with people grabbing, and we'll talk about that in 1 minute when we get to Rabbi Shimon's position. But it's this idea of it's not about fighting and grabbing and destroying. It's about finding life and in search of where things living from and not who's destroying who. So comes Rabbi Shimon and says, okay, after we have this conversation between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, back and forth, all of a sudden we get another opinion. Amar Rabbi Shimon, kol sheha'elyon yachol lifshot et yado v'litov harei hu shelo v'ashar shel tachton. He says an interesting answer. The upper person puts his arm wherever his arm can reach. That's what he gets. Beyond that, he doesn't get. Okay, the rest belongs to the person living at the bottom. There's a few different explanations given. Rashi explains, if you look at the second to last line in Rashi here, Hashar shel tachton, he says, Elyon hu gufei afkure mefker lehu legabe. The rest belongs to the bottom person. Why? Because really everything belongs to the upper person, because that's where the life comes from. Kind of agrees with Rabbi Meir. However, at a certain point, he gives up on some of it, because what does he say? Ginai hu lo litov reshut likanes letoch shel chavero v'lilko. You ever have, the balls go into your neighbor's yard? This happens all the time, right? And you're embarrassed to go in there all the time when it keeps happening. So this person doesn't want to be going all the time into the neighbor's yard, and therefore is going to say, fine, whatever I can reach is mine. Everything else I'm giving up. That's one perspective. A second perspective is really looking at the opposite way, that really it all belongs to the lower person. But because the upper person can reach part of it, we're going to give, the lower person is willing to give up part of theirs to the upper person. We might get back at the end. We'll hopefully get back and we'll suggest a possible third interpretation, but I want to leave these two with you right now for thinking, and we're going to move on to the Gemara. The first thing the Gemara does is limits this whole machloket. And we're really back to the machloket, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. They put Rabbi Shimon aside, and we'll get back to Rabbi Shimon, but right now they're putting Rabbi Shimon aside. Amar Rava, b'ikaro kule amalu pligi te elyon havi. Rava says, when you're talking about the roots, obviously the roots of this tree belong to the person who soil it is in. He pligi binofo. The whole thing is that we're talking about, the argument is all about what's growing out of it. Like if someone were to, let's say, uproot the tree, obviously the roots are going to go with the person who's the upper person. So what's the machloket about what's growing? Well, Rabbi Meir savar shadei nofo batar ikaro. Rabbi Yehuda savar lo amrin on shadei nofo batar ikaro. Does what's growing follow the roots? Or do we say, no, it doesn't follow the roots? That's the basic machloket. And then these words are now in parentheses. Azde l'tamayu. Azde l'tamayu usually means they go consistent with what they say elsewhere. The problem is that this doesn't really fit because we're going to quote two other sources in two other contexts where they're going to say something similar, but it's not really the same thing. So I want you to pay attention because if you read it without really paying attention, it seems like, oh, it's saying the same thing, but it's really not. But what you have here is that Rabbi Meir basically says the person whose land it is, they're the person that we're going to favor more so than the other. And that's what's similar about this machloket in these two other cases of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. If you have a tree that's owned by one person and the land underneath is owned by somebody else, which happens, sometimes somebody will sell a tree in their field. So what do we say? Well, if all of a sudden there's a new growth coming out, sometimes the growths come from the ground and sometimes they actually come out of a tree. You'll have all of a sudden something growing out of there. So if you have something growing out of the trunk or growing out of the roots of the tree, Hare Elu Shabala Karka. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, consistent with his approach, the main person that's going to be the owner of this is the person who the ground belongs to, because all of it's really coming from the ground, even though this new growth is coming from the trunk of the tree. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mina Geza Shabala Ilan Mina Shorashim Shabala Karka. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. From the trunk, okay, I agree with you about the roots. Obviously, if it's growing from the roots, it's going to belong to the person who owns the ground. But if it's coming from the tree itself, it's going to go to the person who owns the tree. Utna nami gabe orla. By the way, there's a Mishnah in Orla about the same topic. What is Orla? The first 3 years you can't eat fruits from when a new tree grows. What if there's a new growth coming out of an already existing tree or from already existing roots, and all of a sudden a new tree grows with new fruits? Is that considered you have to start the count from the beginning, or does it go by the main tree? So again, they're going to fall into the line in the same way. So Tnan Nami Gabe Orla Ki Agavna, they have the exact same machloket by Orla. Elana Yotze Min HaGezer U'Min HaShorashim Chayav BaOrla Divrei Rabbi Meir. So again, Rabbi Meir says you have this tree, and a new tree grows out of a trunk or of the roots. It's going to be Chayav in Orla, meaning we're going to start the count all from the beginning. We're going to view this as something new because it's as if it really came from the ground. Because again, everything for him is all about coming from the ground. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mina Geza Patul U'Mina Shorashim Chayav. It's going to be, you're going to be exempt from Orla if it came from the tree, because it's really just one of the same tree. Now the Gemara wants to tell you, why did they need to argue about the exact same topic, one time talking about laws of ownership and one time talking about laws of Orla? So tzriche, de'iyash me'inan kamaita. What's the main difference basically? Well, one is Dine Mamonot, there's two people fighting over something, and one is Dine Isurim when it comes to, right, the way we call this, Ben Adam Lechavero and Ben Adam Lemakom, which is such an appropriate way to end our Masechet, which has been a complete Masechet all about Ben Adam Lechavero, and now we make this comparison to what might you have thought were differences, but in fact are not. So, if you had the first machloket about the ownership, you would say that's where Rabbi Yehuda says, we'll go with it belongs to the tree because it's mamonot. And mamonot, we don't have any reason to favor one person over the other. And it came out of the tree, so we'll say it goes with the tree. But by Orla, where maybe you're doing something wrong by Torah law, by eating fruit that perhaps should be considered new fruit, maybe he would agree with Rabbi Meir. Therefore, they had to say, don't think that. Really, the argument goes across the board. Now let's do the reverse. What if you just had it by Orla? And you would say by Orla, right? Rabbi Yehuda would say, even then, we're going to be lenient. So of course, he'd say the same thing by us. So what's the obvious reason why you're going to need it? Because we have to now focus on Rabbi Meir. You'd say that's where Rabbi Meir says it. that he's going to be strict when it comes to Orla and say everything comes from the ground. But maybe in a case of Mamadot, he'd agree with Rabbi Yehuda and be more, again, it's not really lenient here. There is no lenient, but maybe say, it did come out of the tree. We'll give it to the tree owner. And therefore it's tzriche. That's why you needed both. Two more things till we end this Masechet. Amar Rabbi Shimon, kol she'alyon yachol lifshon. So now we're going to get to this opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As far as you could put your hand out, the upper gun, that's as far as we go. Amrei debei Rabbi Yana, u'bilvad shelo ye'anes. Rabbi Yana says, as long as you don't force it. Okay, there's two different explanations what this means. First of all, we've talked a lot about ones and being forced and all that, or accidental. What it really means here, according to one interpretation, is as long as you don't, okay, imagine the upper person. The law is as far as your hand reaches. So this upper person is going to go and reach his hand, go up on tippy toes, try to reach as far as possible to get as much as possible. And that's what Rabbi Yana says, do not do that. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, you are not to push the limits. You have to where your hand reaches, but no more than that. Some people say that the Rambam explains it, make sure you don't fall. Make sure you don't ones like an accident. Make sure that when you lean over, you don't lean over too much, that you're going to fall and end up hurting yourself. That's like a kind of funny interpretation, but interesting. By Rav Ana v'itema Rabbi Yirmiyah, megia lenofo ve'en megia likaro, or megia likaro ve'en megia lenofo mai. What if standing at the top and he can reach what's coming out, but the roots are all low down and he can't reach them? Or what if it's the reverse? The roots are high up, but the tree is growing downward and he can't, or the vegetable or whatever it is growing, and he can't reach all the way down. So what do we do? Teku. We don't have an answer. Very common. The Masechet ends with this, first of all, quoting Ephraim Safra, who never appears in the Gemara other than this one time. Talmido shel Rish Lakish. They usually don't even tell you this, that he happens to be the student of, right? Very rarely do they tell you. They just kind of tell you he passed on this information and you assume he must have been a student. But here it tells he's a student of Rish Lakish, and he says, Mishum Rish Lakish, halakha ke Rabbi Shimon. Okay, very simple. We pass him like Rabbi Shimon. Amruah kamei de shabur malka, amar lehu apirion nimtie leRabbi Shimon. The very last line of Bava Metzia mentions Shabur Malka. Who's Shabur Malka? If you remember, he's a Persian king, a Persian ruler. It's a little bit strange. What's he doing in the last chapter here? In the last sentence, Rashi points out that Shabur Malka was Baki B'dinim. He knew a lot of Jewish law. The commentators say, how could he learn Jewish law? You're not supposed to teach Torah to non-Jews. What's going on here? And he says, Rabbi Shimon. Let's shower praise on Rabbi Shimon because he has a great opinion here. Okay, what's going on here? Why is he showering praise on Rabbi Shimon? And why is, first of all, there's a debate, which Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon is Rish Lakish's Rabbi Shimon, and the other Rabbi Shimon is the one in the Mishnah. Either which way, it's the same opinion, so it doesn't matter to us so much. Now, what he's basically saying is that's a fabulous opinion. So first of all, if you look in the Yerushalmi quotes this Ephraim in the name of Rish Lakish, saying yachloku, not as far as your hand reaches, but split it, which we've been learning about the entire Masechet. Shnayim Ochazim, right? By the way, this very much sounds like Shnayim Ochazim. Whatever you're holding, whatever you can reach, that's yours. Whatever you can't, right? That's not yours. And it seems like the Masechet is kind of ending where it started. And perhaps, even though it says yachloku there, which seems like it's different, it might not actually be different. And instead of saying it really belongs to the upper, but he's giving up on a bit, or it really belongs to the lower, but he's giving up on a bit. It could be that what his opinion really is yachloku. And it's really saying that we need to come up with the compromise approach. And we've been seeing this throughout the Masechet, which is that the whole idea, and already at the end of the Masechet, you get this Isur, Mamon, and that the whole system of law is different when it comes to Ben Adam L'Chavero. And we're going to see this a lot when we get into Bava Batra as well, which is that there's a lot here of balancing the needs of different people. And there is no right or wrong, machmir, mekel, there's no such thing. It's all about having people live together and learning how to be together. And a lot of that has to do with this issue of, number one, listening to each other, as we talked about in the Mishnah, and yachloku, and giving up parts and giving in and finding compromises. And I think that's really the message. And the reason they mentioned the Shabur Malka is because this is a universal message. It's something that, right? And one of the reasons I always Bava Metzia is one of my favorite Masechet, is because it really gets to ideas that you can understand outside of Torah law, outside of, right? But the Torah has its unique way of teaching you what are the values, what are the Torah values, but it's something you can understand in the real world that we meet every day, whether it's employer-employee relationships or loaning money, or the tons and tons of examples that someone just left me a message earlier about how she was dealing with an apartment that the floor, the leak was going down to the floor below, and it just, you see this in everyday activities. And I think that's why they end this with, this is a universal theme, and what Shavur Malka is saying is the rabbis had a really good understanding of this concept of giving in and getting along. So as we finish our Masechet, our bracha is that we are able to see this more around us in our communities and in the world at large, of this idea of people listening to each other and getting along better and sharing. Hadran ala chabayit b'aliyah uslik ala Masechet Bava Metzia. Everybody ready? Share my screen. We'll start the Siyum ceremony. Hadran alach Masechet Bava Metzia v'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Bava Metzia v'da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Bava Metzia v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Bava Metzia v'hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Bava Metzia v'da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Bava Metzia v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Bava Metzia hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Bava Metzia v'da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Bava Metzia v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon l'fanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, shetehe toratcha umanutenu ba'olam hazeh, utehe imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rachman bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei toratcha befinu ufi piyot amcha beit Yisrael. ונהיה אנחנו, כולנו, צאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. מאוהבי תחכמני מצוותיך, כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך, למען לא אבוש. לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך, כי בם חייתני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן, 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת בבא מציע, כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ומפי זרענו עד עולם. ויתקיים בנו, בתהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך תשמור עליך, בהקיצות כי תשיחך. יבי ירבו ימיך, ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה, בשמאלה עושר בכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. אשר כוחך, אשר כוחכם. Very, very exciting. It was a long Masechet. We have another long one coming up. I will tell you, if we're going to start Bava Batra now, it's the longest Masechet. However, a big however, which is a real advantage to Daf Yomi learners, the Dapim are much shorter. So Shir should be shorter, and which is good for summertime, although we will be going into the winter as well. Our next Siyum will be in December. We have a long time to go, but it is a bit of a shorter Dapim, but longer Masechet. We'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, so starting with the very beginning of Masechet Bava Batra. Hashutafim sheratzu la'asot mechitza b'chatzir. You can see that this is a real continuation of the previous Masechet. We were talking about partners, people living together in the same building, all that. Now we're going into partners. Sheratzu la'asot mechitza b'chatzir. They wanted to divide a courtyard. We're going to see later they're talking about a courtyard that's really too small to divide, but they decide anyway they're going to divide it. Bonim et hakotel ba'emtza. So when we decided we're going to put up a kotel together, we put it right in the middle, meaning we're going to learn that this wall takes up space. So it's going to take up space. We put it right in the center. Part of your space and part of my space is going to share, really continuing this idea of yachloku. And that's going to be a big issue in the next chapter. I recommend you listen to Dr. Ayala Lipson-Hoffman's introduction. It's a fabulous introduction as usual. And it really gives you a bird's eye view. Speaking of bird's eye view, that will lead us to our next speaker, which is Dr. Elana Stein Hain. There's also, by the way, flashback. There's an introduction as well, a written one. So get ready for tomorrow morning by doing some of the intros, getting the bird's eye view, and which is one of the reasons why I love to have Dr. Elana Stein Hain with us. She's fabulous at giving you the bird's eye view. For those who haven't yet started listening to Din and Daf, it's highly recommended. What she does is exactly what we don't get to do in Daf, which is the zoom out, which is the whole perspective. And another amazing thing about Elana is the ability to tackle complex issues and explain them in a very simple, clear manner. And it's a real talent she has. And if you really haven't listened to strongly recommend it. After hearing her tonight, I'm sure you'll go listen to her shiurim. We're thrilled to have her creating weekly content on our website. And she also has a new book out, if you're interested, called Circumventing the Law, which obviously is related to a lot of things we've been talking about, rabbinic perspectives on legal loopholes. And when she's not giving her weekly shiur for us, she's a Rosh Beit Midrash and Senior Research Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. She's going to speak today, right now, about setting the ethical floor and the ethical ceiling.
Thank you so much, Rabbanit Michelle Cohen Farber. It is so great to be here. I'm actually in Yerushalayim, and it's very nice to be making a Siyum in Yerushalayim after the year that everybody's had. It's incredible to be here with friends and family and colleagues, and it's nice to have all of you in all your different places by extension. So what I want to do is I want to think about what we're calling the ethical floor and the ethical ceiling. Ethical floor is, let's say, you can't dip below this. This is your basic minimum standard. And I would assume that in general, law is actually trying to do that. It's trying to set an ethical floor. You don't want to dip below it. If you dip below it, you end up with what we might call something like midat sdom, right? Like you're like a sodomite, if that's what you're doing. But that's very different from the ethical ceiling, which is maybe something that you aspire to. And I'm not sure that we can always enforce on people an ethical ceiling, because sometimes if you're trying to push people to go beyond the basic standard of what's suggested, you end up in a territory where you might be impinging on people's rights a little bit too much, right? So think about it, go back to COVID, let's say. If we're looking at a situation where we say to people, in order to keep each other safe, here is the basic foundational standard that everyone has to keep to. There might be people who end up being a little bit more machmira, and there might be people who say, no, the basic standard is what I'm looking at. And one of the things that I think is so interesting in both Bava Kama and Bava Metzia is that you find a discussion of both ethical floor, where we are going to legislate basic standards, but also an aspiration for the ethical ceiling. And one of the things that I wonder is, how do you get people to aspire to an ethical ceiling if you can't make them do it? Or can you? So the first thing I want to show you is just a visual as we think about this question of what Bava Metzia really is about. Because it's true what Rabbanit Michelle is saying, Bava Metzia is really about trying to create a Ben Adam Chavero situation that is ruled by give and take, ethics, compromise, awareness of people's rights, awareness of our obligations. And I think writ large, it's trying to create a society that even someone like King Shapur might look at and say, hey, this actually makes sense. This is a really ethical society that you have going. And so one of the things that I noticed within Bava Metzia is just how often Sefer Mishlei was quoted. Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, is quoted over and over again in Bava Metzia. If you don't believe me, check out this visual. Sefaria has this amazing link. If you see here, www.sefaria.org.il/explore, and I'll put it in the chat in a minute, where you can look at how often a Masechet is quoted, how often, a book of Tanakh is quoted in a Masechet. So let's take a look down at Bava Metzia. You click on it, and here's what it shows you. These are the Sfarim that are most quoted in Bava Metzia. A lot of Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. You would expect that. But the next most cited Sefer is Sefer Mishlei. And when I see that, it also makes me wonder, well, wait a second, where else is Sefer Mishlei highly quoted in Gemara? And if you don't believe me, look at the linker yourself. What you'll see is the places where Sefer Mishlei is mostly quoted are, get ready, Bava Metzia, Bava Batra, Sanhedrin. All of these Nizikin kind of build a proper society, which for anybody who studies Sefer Mishlei, you know that Sefer Mishlei is actually about creating a society in which people are diligent, do the right thing, don't steal, don't cheat, recognize that doing bad and violence don't pay off. And then, of course, the other two places where it features prominently, one is in Masechet Sota, because Mishlei is very much about the Isha Chachama and also the Isha Zara, going after the good woman, Eshet Chayil, and not going after the bad woman, who is paganism. And it also features heavily in Masechet Brachot, which makes sense because Mishlei is trying to tell you what is the good life about at the very beginning. But when I saw this, I said to myself, this is a bigger story than just what do I do if I find lost property? It's a bigger story than I can't walk into somebody's house to collect their mashkon, to collect their surety, their collateral. There's something here about trying to create a society that is recognized by all human beings, right? Because Mishlei is the kind of sefer that kind of speaks to humanity by all human beings as something that is remarkable and something to write home about. And so in order to do that, it's really not enough to set an ethical floor. You have to be able to suggest an ethical ceiling as well. But how do you do it? One of the things that I think is really, really difficult is trying to get people to behave in general. And there are probably two general ways that we get people to behave. One is through rules and enforcement, and another is through maybe education, right? So rules and enforcement is what we might say, and you're going to learn in Bava Batra, Kofin al Midat Sodom. We force people not to act like members of the Sodom society. How would you act like a member of Sodom? You would act that way if you actually are unwilling to let somebody else use something when it literally costs you nothing. Simply because you want to show that you own it. It's mine. It's mine, not yours. I always cite the example when I was a kid, one of my siblings, he finished his bagel, but there was half left. And I was like, hey, can I have it? And he's like, nope, that was my bagel. I'm not having it. You can't have it either. Threw it in the garbage, right? We actually can enforce, Beitin can enforce, and you're going to see in Bava Metzia in the first parak, in Bava Batra in the first parak. Beitin can enforce. You can't act that way. There is an ethical floor. Rights are not everything. But at the same time, education has to play a role in getting people to decide what they want to do, to decide to be better than just the bare minimum standard. And so back in Bava Kama, we saw a concept called, let's say, Yedei Shamayim, that you have to do something in order to do God's standards. So even if the Beit Din can't force you to do something, in order, let's say, Yedei Shamayim, you should do it. And in Bava Metzia, we see a similar concept, Lifnei Mishurat Hadin, that you go within the line of the law. The law allows you to go up to a certain line, and we're telling you, don't take everything that you can. Go a little bit before. Now, can we enforce that? It seems like that's actually a matter of discretion. It's a matter of education, where we say to people, we want you to do this, but we can't force you to do this. So as we run through Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Batra, we see that there's sort of a spectrum of tools at our disposal to try to help people behave properly, ben adam l'chavero, in such a way that a King Shapur might look and say, wow, you guys are impressive, what you have going on here. And one way is through enforcement, where Beit Din can say, you must do X because this is a basic standard. And another way is through education and teaching people of their own discretion to decide, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do. I don't have, for example, if you remember some of the cases from Bava Metzia, I don't have to return this object to you. We found it in the shuk. You already had yeush on it. You already despaired of ever getting it back. I actually have to give it back to you when you come. But with Nimisharat Din, I'm gonna. Or you lost these things 12 months ago. You're coming to me after 12 months and saying, these are my camels. It's too late. Yeush. Let's take care of it. Or if you remember those porters who dropped the barrels and they said, we want to get paid anyway. And at first, their employer said, get paid? What do you mean? He took their clothing as collateral and said, you owe me money. You broke my stuff. And then he's told by a fellow rabbi, nah, you gotta give them their stuff back. And then they said, we're hungry. We need something to eat. We need our day's wages. And he said, really? But you broke my stuff. You didn't do the job. And he said, no, sorry, you got to give it to them. And he gave it to them. But what does he quote? He quotes Sefer Mishlei. Last time I checked, Sefer Mishlei is not a place where you find ironclad halacha lema'aseh rules. That's where you find educational aspiration. You want to be a good person? You want to walk in the ways of the righteous? You should give them back their clothes and you should pay them their wages, right? So we find this kind of educational approach. And I want to think with you for a few minutes, what are the benefits of using an enforcement approach? What are the benefits of using an educational approach? And there are many, many situations in which this comes into play. It's not just actually the way people interact with each other. Even ben adam lamakom, you can ask these things. How do you get people to act the way that you want them to act? Or better yet, how do you create an environment in which the things that are going on are what you would want things to look like? So if you use the enforcement mechanism, right? Benefits of rules and enforcement. Here's a benefit, and you can put in the chat if you think of others. Here's a benefit of rules. They're very transparent. Everybody knows what they are. The rule is you have to wear your mask when you come within 6 feet of someone else in the supermarket in 2020, spring 2020. Okay? It's a rule. It's very clear. And usually these things are things people know beforehand. You can point to the sign. This is what it says. There's nothing vague here. It's very clear. Another benefit is it gets the job done. I don't care if you like wearing the mask. I don't care if you don't like wearing the mask. You're going to wear it. That's what's going to happen because it's a rule and we're going to enforce it. Very, very positive. Here are the drawbacks, right? A major drawback is if you're going to enforce a rule that is going to apply, let's say, across the board, you're going to have to be modest about it. You can't force everybody to go above and beyond. You can say, do this bare minimum. That's what rules and enforcement should do, right? It's like saying you're forced to do extra credit. You can't be forced to do extra credit. That's why it's extra credit, right? A second problem with it is, does it really inculcate good midot in people, or it just makes them do it, and the minute the rule is gone, they don't do it anymore, right? And they're just, right? So if Beit Din's not looking, I'll act like a sodomite because there's nobody here who's going to take me back and pull me and rein me in, right? On the other hand, you have education. I want to teach you to be a good person. I want to teach you that even if Beit Din can't get you to do something and can't penalize you, let's say Yidei Shamayim, you should do it, right? You should really do it. So I'm going to teach you that. Lifnei Misharat Din, I can't force you to return that Aveda, to return that object, that lost object, but I'm going to tell you if you want to aspire, you really should do it. What are the benefits? It's all about inculcating virtue. It's all about creating good people. It's a beautiful thing. And in a certain sense, it actually will outlast any rule you make because it's not about your enforcement. It's not about people being, oh, I have to follow the rules or I'm going to get in trouble. It's actually people being mafnim, people internalizing, right? What they're supposed to do. Or by the way, maybe doing that to impress someone else. Maybe they haven't internalized anything. But the point is, you don't have to tell them to do it. They're going to do it. But here's the problem. You know the problem. You saw it. Remember that story of the guy with the sticks? And he asked Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi to help him carry his sticks. And Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi doesn't have to help him carry his sticks. Talmid Chacham, and he's older. It's not appropriate. Zakin ve'eno fichvoto. It's not appropriate for him to have to do that. So Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi says to himself, okay, I know what I'm going to do. Of my own discretion, I'm going to help this guy. I'm going to give him money for his sticks instead of helping him carry them home. Gives him money for the sticks, takes the sticks and says, these sticks are hefker. Anybody who wants them can take them. The guy comes over and picks up his sticks again. He says, can you help me with my sticks? I want to get them home. And Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi says, no. Here's another $5. I'm not helping you get them home. I want you to take the money, right? And so he takes the money. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi puts down the sticks. The guy comes over again to get the sticks. After this was ownerless for anybody to take except for you, right? Like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. What's the problem with discretion? It's impossibly vague. What do you mean? Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi gets to just decide how he's going to help this guy? This guy wants help in a certain way, and Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi isn't going to give him the help that he wants. The standards are not clear. What's needed is not clear. You need so much communication in order to know what is actually going to help people in this situation. It's so different from rules, which are so clear and so obvious, right? The other thing I would say about discretion is the problem with it is that it's up to discretion, and people don't always use their discretion the way you want them to use it. So if what we're talking about is hitting an ethical ceiling, okay, so people don't always hit the ethical ceiling. The rules will be for the ethical floor, and for the ethical ceiling, some good people will do, some people won't. Okay, so this is sort of like the pitzul, the split that we would make between things that we enforce, like kofin al midat sedom, which you'll see in Bava Batra, and things that we educate towards but we can't enforce, like Masechet yedei shamayim, like lifnim mishirat hadin. Beautiful, amazing, done, finito, until you get to the Rishon. Because the Rishonim said, wait, no. Mishirat hadin, but it says you have to give the clothing and the money to the porters. It says you have to, when somebody asks, do I have to return this object? They're told you have to return it. In fact, the Gemara told us that the reason why the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, was destroyed is because Danu Dinehem Din Torah. They followed the strict letter of the law, and they didn't do their din. They didn't do their legal decisions based on Lifnei Mishirat Hadin. So some Rishonim say, no, this discretion stuff, push it out of your mind. It's not, no, it's all rules. It's all rules. Even Lifnei Mishirat Hadin, we can force people to do Lifnei Mishirat Hadin, which is, by the way, a way of saying we kind of don't trust people. And it's also a way of saying, if we don't give people a reason that they have to do X, they may never do it. And we may never get beyond that ethical floor, and we actually really want to. So I find it really interesting to find some of the Rishonim, and some of them do this with, let's say, Yidei Shamayim also. They'll say, until you pay, even though it's only, let's say, Yidei Shamayim, we consider you a thief, and we won't let you give Edut in Beit Din, right? They're trying to coerce you. They're trying to force your hand. They don't want you to have this full discretionary behavior. But I think the realm of discretion is super duper important. And I think it's why Mishlei is quoted so many times in Bava Metzia, because it's one thing to learn something from Shmot or from Vayikra or from Bamidbar or from Devarim, but to learn something from Mishlei is saying, look, I can't force you to do this, but this is the way you should be. This is what you should be doing. This is how we create the kind of society that we're trying to create. So try to be the best that you can be. Try to follow the advice that the parent gives to the child in Mishlei, which is be good, right? Be good. I don't need a pasuk in Vayikra to tell me be good. All of Mishlei just keeps saying be good, be good, be good, be good, right? So I think that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. I want to share one more piece. We think of these things, like we look at it in the Gemara, and it jumps off the page sometimes. The vividness of these examples of, an arnak, a wallet in the shuk, right? It jumps off the page. Or two brothers fighting over inheritance, which you'll see in Bava Batra, right? It jumps off the page. But I got to tell you, this stuff is live in Israeli law today. There is an incredible case. I think it's from the late 70s. It's Kitan Limited versus Sarah Weiss. And basically, the case is as follows. The case is, unfortunately, I'm going to stop smiling now because it's a very serious case, very unfortunate case. Someone who was a security guard at a company who had neshek, who had a weapon as part of their job, took that neshek home and used it to commit a crime. Okay. And now the company is being sued for giving that weapon to the person. There's some liability. Your employee used this. Yes, they were on their off time. They used the gun that you gave them, and we're suing you for damages. Now, across the board, this went to the Israeli Supreme Court. Across the board, everybody said, no. By law, you're not liable for that, right? You're really not liable for that. But here's where the question came up. Should we suggest that, lifnim mishurat hadin, to go beyond what you're required to do, maybe you should pay some damages? And I want to show you the language that two different justices use arguing against each other as to whether you should bring lifnim mishurat hadin into a late 20th century Israeli courtroom. Ready? I'm going to share my screen. Let me see if I can get the right thing for you. The right place. 1 second. Doesn't matter how many times I share my screen. It's always an issue. 1 second. Is this the one that I want to show you? Okay, check it out. So we have, I need to be able to go down. Justice Menachem Elon, who is very well known for what we would call mishpat ivri, in the sense of a movement to bring in Torah and rabbinic and Talmudic law into secular Israeli jurisprudence in the courts. Okay, so he says it is a Jewish tradition and a fundamental principle in Jewish law that along with strict legal liability, there is an additional obligation to act lifnim mishurat hadin. It is of particular significance here that this obligation found one of its chief expressions in Jewish law in the field of torts, right? In our field, Bava Kama starting with, right? In a case precisely in point with the instant case, which was a case of nezek, which again, back to Bava Kama, but we're like cumulative, right? Under our current legal system, we cannot force a person to act beyond the letter of the law. We can't force lifnim mishurat hadin. He's not going to go as far as some of the Rishonim who say, no, we can force people to do lifnim mishurat hadin. It is up to the initiative and the goodwill of the litigant. But it appears to me that under certain circumstances, it is appropriate for the sitting judge to make such a suggestion. I myself would exhort the vindicated party to behave in a manner beyond the letter of the law and to compensate the claimants as originally intended. Okay? ... And then, by the way, he quotes Mishle. So he says, yes, that you should. Now, Justice Meir Shamgar took the opposite opinion. Now remember, what they're arguing about here is not should we make them do lifnim mishurat hadin, but can we even suggest it? I strongly dissent from the objective revealed between the lines of the opinion of my distinguished colleague, Elon, that seeks to elevate payment of compensation lifnim mishurat hadin to the status of a settled general principle of the law of torts. Such an approach would necessarily bring about the filing of frivolous appeals, because people would say, you're forcing me to do lifnim mishurat hadin. Of course, he didn't say I'm forcing, right? But it would lead to appeals. My concern here is not for the time of the court, but the resulting consequence, namely the adverse effects on those appellants whose appeals have merit and who will have to wait even longer for a decision in their cases, right? People are so busy appealing a lifnim mishurat hadin ruling that the people who have real appeals to deal with, they actually never get their hearing. Moreover, and this is really the key, a legal system that deliberately chooses to abandon the boundary lines marked out in the substantive law and to add as an additional and alternative stratum layer and as an established part of the system a recommendation for the payment of compensation beyond what the law requires necessarily acts according to impossibly vague standards. which ultimately depend on the fortuity of which particular judge sits when the case is reached. So this judge thinks Lifnim Misharat Adin constitutes this, and this judge thinks Lifnim Misharat Adin it's constituted by that. There's no actual standard. Is it $20? Is it $100? Is it $1,000? Such a system will, over the course of time, bring about confusion in the law and adversely affect the rights of the parties. The absence of clear standards may also often actually produce inconsistent results. Now, I love this because whether you're a lawyer or you're not a lawyer, what I love seeing is I love seeing these principles acted upon in contemporary life, saying, of course, everybody's goal is that we should have a society where people are not taken advantage of. Of course, that's everybody's goal. But how do you go about it? Is there a possibility that, yes, people not getting taken advantage of, the law can handle that? But there might be something above people not getting taken advantage of. The law may not be able to touch it. People benefiting, the law may not be able to touch it. What may only be able to touch it is just teaching people to be good, right? And so one of the things that I think is kind of remarkable is that for Chazal, and I do wonder if some of this is because they themselves don't have a fully fleshed out court system that is enforceable in the ways that under an imperial rule it would be enforceable. I wonder if some of that actually leads them to be equally interested in here are the laws that are enforceable as they are interested in here's the education that you need to do in order for people to move beyond even where the law can get them, right? As opposed to something where the legal system itself is what's so vaunted. This is actually, we're trying to get to a certain goal, which is applying Torah principles in the world. Some of that is going to be through law and enforcement, and some of that is going to be through education and discretion. Mazel tov to everybody, and may we merit to act these things out and to build a society that looks like that and continue to shape it and edit it where it goes wrong.
Thank you, Elana. That was fabulous, really fabulous. You wonder why the concerns that they had about that you read at the end about how it could go sour. It was interesting. The rabbis weren't concerned. We're often concerned in the Gemara about might cause to zilzul beitin and chaos, and they don't actually bring it up. It's very fascinating. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the next part, which is we're honored to have Elaine Gottesman speak with us. She's actually a social worker who works with victims of abuse. And she's written me a few emails from time to time about things that very much connect with her work. And it's always interesting to hear from learners when they bring their own profession into the learning and use it to have all sorts of interesting insights. Elaine.
Hi, thank you so much, Rabbanit Michelle. It's really such an honor to be here. It's thrilling to have something to celebrate, as someone said in the chat. And I live in Manhattan, context. So I deliberated how and when to start learning Daf Yomi, to committing to that. But I finally joined the cycle back in August 2023 when we were learning Masechet Kiddushin. And so I've been so grateful to be a part of this virtual community over the last year. I've been humbled and impressed every day by the consistency, loyalty, and commitment that the entire brilliant group of Hadran women and Rabbanit Michelle have shown day in and out. And you have helped me weather many storms on joyous days and on horrendous days, personal and communal. I feel like I can always go back to the Daf and to this community. You've allowed me, and I imagine so many women and men, a safe place of stability and comfort amidst the roller coaster of our lives. So thank you. As a new Dafer, I very humbly want to share a brief reflection from my professional standpoint, as Rabbanit Michelle said. And it's actually, I'm hoping it layers and shows a different facet to what Dr. Elana Stein just said. Brilliant. And what also Rabbanit Michelle said in the Siyum. We know that Bava Metzia and rabbinic law in general is an effort to translate the values expressed in the Torah into on-the-ground laws guiding our day-to-day interactions. So as we just heard today, and then also Dr. Hoffman-Lipson so clearly and eloquently stated in her introduction to Bava Metzia, that we see this time and again. How do we translate, let's say, the value of not shirking your responsibility into legal practice? So I'm a social worker at a hospital in New York City, where I work with victims of elder abuse. On a day-to-day level, my job is to facilitate a safe experience while they're at the hospital for these victims, as well as work with them and their loved ones to facilitate a post-hospital discharge course that reduces the risk of harm. In a broader sense, I like to see myself as an elder justice professional, where I put in my work to create a society where ideally elder abuse never occurs. In my role as a social worker, I dabble in the realm of law, though I'm far from a lawyer. But I'm fascinated by the ways laws can influence and shape society. What are the levers that our authorities and societal structures can pull to make society more equitable, accessible, and united? What are the ways we can predict human tendencies and push them to be better people, just as Dr. Stein just said. So as I go through the daf, I see the various ways and various beautiful ways that the sages try to use law to try to shape a peaceful, connected society, essentially maintain community. And we saw a powerful example back in Bava Kama of an image of society that the rabbis tried to imagine, where the Braita described a takana that makes it very accessible for thieves to repent. You probably remember this. The takana was that if a thief decides on her own volition to go back to the person she stole from, and she decides to return the stolen item, which is encouraged, the one who was stolen from has to say no thank you to the item. This takana, I think, is pretty radical, where the victim cannot accept the item back. But I loved hearing it because this is actually very much in line with the concept of restorative justice. You may have heard of that term, and it's a concept that's been around for a long time. The idea where using law to restore a sense of community rather than penalize and lock up a criminal whenever possible. And it does come off these days as a potentially, radical way of thinking of things, especially if you're the one who's the victim. But it's interesting that the rabbis suggested that kind of concept here, where the takana almost forces a face-to-face encounter between the perpetrator and the victim. And it encourages a human interaction to occur, one where the two sides can learn about each other and potentially restore a sense of identity and trust in each other. And you can imagine what that could look like. You were forced to go back, give back the item and talk to each other and work out what happened here. And that feeling of acceptance, where the person says, it's okay, I don't need this item back. Another powerful example from Bava Metzia is the conversation between Abai and Rava that begins on the bottom of Daf 93, where Abai asked Rava, what's the halacha in the case where a shepherd comes across a thief and then the shepherd talks tough, trying to show his strength, and the thief ultimately steals from him? In this case, Rava answers, the halacha is, it's as though the shepherd taunted and motivated the thief, and the shepherd is held responsible. So funny enough, the day prior to learning that daf, I had a work dinner with one of the world's experts on gun violence, Dr. Arthur Kellerman, who is known for his some people think it's controversial research on gun ownership. And note that it's done in America, so I'm not applying this to any other countries. Yes, it's publicly controversial. His research says if you possess a gun in your home, contrary to popular thinking that you can defend yourself better, you're actually more likely to be shot or endangered. He said that he sadly sees countless stories, devastating stories of innocent people killed by the police in America because the policeman saw a gun in hand, even if it was locked and unloaded, and mistakenly reacted by shooting, claiming it was for their own self-defense. So I'm far from trying to make any political statements here. And again, I'm describing his research in America. But I am underscoring the brilliance of Rava, who understands how minds think and creates safeguards in society by discouraging taunting behavior. In almost every daf of the Talmud, we see how scholars grapple with human behavior and make efforts to balance the value of one's own personal benefit with the value of community benefit, and how our scholars set boundaries and ethical floors and ceilings for the greater good. I'm fascinated by the fact that our rabbis have intentionally exposed their conversations for the lay public to understand and to read and to see what sacrifices are necessary to make a functioning and ethical and thriving society. We are invited to sit next to the lawmakers to see how they deliberate their laws that define the way we live. And I feel so privileged that Rabbanit Michelle and everyone in Hadran has enabled me to bear witness to how these sages work these things out. And on a quick note, possibly a call to action about how I came to Daf Yomi. I learned to love Talmud in seminary after high school, but I never saw myself as someone who's actually capable of participating in Daf Yomi. I thought it was for someone more educated, more intellectual Jewish thinkers. But about 4 years ago, a brilliant and kind childhood friend of mine, who I honestly never expected to learn Daf Yomi merely because she wasn't a Jewish educator, told me she was learning and loving it. And then she said the magical words, "I totally think you would love Daf Yomi, Elaine." Had she not said that final statement, I think I would have said to myself, good for her, she's so cool, and then walked away. But it became an earworm that someone like me had confidence in me that I could do it. So I hope that this might inspire you to let another woman know that you think you have confidence in her too. Mazal tov to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elaine. That was great, really great. I love the note at the end, especially. It's something I definitely have noticed over the years that people need some encouragement, as you all know, and so spread it around. We're going to finish our evening with two last parts. One is we're going to say the Tfilot for the Chayalim. We'll say the Tfilot for the injured and for the Chetufim, the hostages, and then we're just going to end with a few thank yous. I'll give a few thank yous at the very end and a few small announcements. So I'm honored to invite Hadassah Fortinsky, Carolyn Hochstadter, and Suri Rudolph to say the Tfilot. I'll share my screen. You can just tell me that it came on. It's on. All right, I can't see anybody right now. Yeah. It's on. Okay, great.
In honor of our and for the safety of our soldiers, Misha Berach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Hu Yivarech et Chaylei Tzva Haganah Yisrael v'Anshei Kachot HaBitachon Ha'omdim al Mishmar Artzeinu v'Arei Eloheinu Migvul HaLavanon v'Ad HaMidbar Mitzrayim U'min Hayam HaGadol Ad Lavo HaArava U'Bakom Makom Shehem V'Yabasha Ba'Avir Bayam Yiten Adonai et Oivenu HaKamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifnehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor v'Yatzil et Chayleinu Mikol Tzara v'Tuka Mikol Nega u'Machala Yishlach Bracha v'Atzlacha B'chol Maseh Yadeinu Yadber Sonenu Tachtenu V'Yatrei Meketer Yeshua V'Ater Nitzachon V'Kuyam Bahem HaKatuv Ki Adonai Alechem Ha'olech Imachem Lilachem Lachem Imoy V'Chem Lo Shia Etchem V'Nomar Amen.
Amen.
Whenever you're ready. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeh ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Avoteinu shetishlach mehera refuah shleima min hashamayim refuat hanefesh u'refuat haguf l'chol hapsuim b'ma'aracha Hagadosh Baruch Hu Imale Rachamim Aleihem Lachlimam Ulrapotam Ulachzikam Ulhachayotam Vishlach Lahem Meira Refuah Shlema Min Hashamayim L'chol Evreihem L'chol Gidehem B'toch Sha'ar Cholei Yisrael Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf Hashta Bagala Lizman Kariv V'Nomar Amen.
Amen.
If it's okay, before I read the prayer, just for a minute, first, just thank you for the privilege of being able to do this. The day after October 7th, I belong to a summer community, and one of the members of our minyan there is an Israeli. And he told us immediately in our WhatsApp group that his sister's daughter's two little girls, and two other men in the family were all affected, taken, killed by October 7th. And other than the two Bibas babies, the two little girls were the two youngest children in captivity. Fortunately, thank God they were freed in the first round of releases, but it hit home immediately, the plight of the captives. And the mother just recently gave a 12-minute interview on the Khan channel, and just to hear her describe in more detail and from a little bit more of a distance what exactly happened and what she went through was just both enlightening in the sense of educating us as to how terrible it is, and very terrible at the same time. I also wanted to just add that I also live in New York City. We, together with Elaine, we both belong to Congregation Kehilat Jesher and KJ, Rabbi Luxstein Shul. And shortly after October 7th, one of the women in our community took it on herself to blow up pictures of every single hostage and make a life-size cutout of every hostage. And our entire women's balcony was filled with these cutouts as if they were sitting in our shul and davening with us. And we still have one section with these people, both upstairs and downstairs, and you can literally sit in front of them or behind them and feel like they're in shul with you. So I really appreciate being asked to read this prayer. Thank you. יהי רצון לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שתחזק ותשמור ותנצור את אחינו בית ישראל השבויים והשבויות, בעבור שאנו מתפללים בעבורם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, ישמרם מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע מחלה, ישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם, יוציאם מחושך וצלמוות, וישיבם מהרה לחיק משפחותיהם, ונאמר אמן. And if you will all join me. Acheinu kol beit Yisrael. Acheinu kol beit Yisrael. Hanetunim batzara ubashivya. Haomdim bein bayam ubein bayabasha. Amakam Yerachem Aleichem Yotzieh Mitzara Livcha Umeafel Aliyora Shibud Ligula Hashta Ba'agala Uvisman Kari.
Thank you very much, everyone. Hard times, our learning really keeps us strong, keeps us together, keeps us grounded. I want to thank our fabulous speakers, Elana and Elaine. I want to thank all the women who did the brachot. Thank you for sharing that with us, Suri. I want to thank Art Gould for dedicating the Masechet in memory of his wife, Carol. They would have celebrated their anniversary this week, and she would have celebrated her birthday. So we're thinking of her and missing her as one of our learners. And thinking of you, Art. And I want to also just thank again the Gewurz family. It's important to note that a whole bunch of them really learned the Masechet in tribute to, as part of Tfilot, and also in tribute to their father. And I'm sure really will lift up his neshama, having all the learning of the different family members finishing the Masechet. So thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Maggie for making everything happen at Hadran. And thank you to Mimi, works hard behind the scenes. And thank you, as always, to each and every one of you for being part of this wonderful community and for getting me up every morning to teach you. And it's really a pleasure to be able to teach you and learn from each one of you. And thank you. And Mazal Tov for finishing.
Mazal Tov to everybody. May you really go from strength to strength. Microphones are now open if anybody wants to.
I just want to remind everyone, if you don't have your bookmarks, so we'll reopen the registration. that,
We
and
will.
anyone who needs bookmarks, we will put it up and send around the link. So here's the Bava Batra one. If you don't
And
have
given
it.
that you have 175 pages to keep track of, it's a good one to keep your checklist with you. Microphones are now open if anybody wants to say anything.
Thank you, Mazal Tov, everyone.
Mazel tov.
Thank you, Mazel Tov.
Every time I think next time I won't cry, and every time I do.
Yes, someone always does get us there.
Unbelievable. Fantastic. Thank you so very, very much, Rabbanit Michelle, Maggie, really everyone here.
And loving the Dean and Daf too.
Yes, we are.
Thank you for a wonderful Siyum.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Besarat
Very, very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Laila
Besarat
Tov Kol
Tova. It
Echad.
was beautiful.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Whatever. What day is it?
Shabbat Shalom.
You could say Shabbat
Hi,
Shalom.
Carolyn. I heard you.
Hello, Hannah, and everyone else I know.
Someone asked me to post the link to the Khan interview, so I put it in the chat.
Thank you. That was me. I'm just copying it right now. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
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 Thanks. Bye.
Thank you all. We'll see you in about 175 days.